The theater had been boarded up for decades, its marred facade a skeleton of grandeur. The letters of its marquee, long sunken into disrepair, now spelled nothing, their silence more haunting than the once bright proclamations of sold-out shows. I wasn't supposed to be there. No one was. The rusty lock on the side door had been broken, and curiosity, that reckless whisper, lured me in like a siren. Inside, the air was heavy, the kind of thick, unmoving atmosphere that presses on your chest. The faint smell of mildew mingled with something more metallic, like old blood, though there was nothing to confirm such a thought. My flashlight's beam danced across the dust-shrouded seats, the peeling wallpaper, and the moth-eaten curtains sagging above the stage. Time had gutted the place, leaving behind a carcass of its former glory. Then I saw it. A single script lay on the stage, illuminated by a pale ray of moonlight that sliced through a crack in the roof. It seemed impossibly out of place, untouched by time or grime. My pulse quickened as I climbed the creaking stairs, my footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. Reaching it, I hesitated. The cover was black, devoid of any markings except for a title embossed in faint silver. The Haunted Roll. I picked it up. The paper was ice cold. Inside the first page, my name was there, written in spidery handwriting that was somehow both elegant and rushed. For you, Thomas. A chill rippled down my spine. How could this be? I didn't know anyone who would leave this here, in this forgotten theater. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. The story seemed simple, a tale of an actor slowly consumed by their role. But the dialogue struck a chord too familiar, as though it mirrored words I had spoken in moments I thought private. I wanted to leave the script there, to let it gather dust like the rest of this forsaken place, but my body betrayed me. My hands gripped it tightly as I walked back into the cold night air. I told myself it was curiosity, maybe even a little vanity. But deep down, I knew. Something had attached itself to me in that theater. That night, I couldn't sleep. The script sat on my desk, mocking me in its silence. I tried to ignore it, but my thoughts circled back to it, over and over, a gravitational pull I couldn't resist. When I finally opened it again, the words seemed different. They flowed too easily, sinking into my mind as though I had always known them. When I read the lines aloud, the air around me felt heavier, charged with something unseen. A phone call broke the trance. It was Julia, my agent. "You're in luck," she said, her voice tinged with relief. "An opportunity came through, a new production looking for a lead. They need someone immediately. Auditions tomorrow morning. I thought of you." "What's it called?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The Haunted Roll." The audition room was sterile, all polished floors and fluorescent lights. It seemed like any other casting call, but the script in my hands was anything but ordinary. The lines felt alive, writhing with a dark energy that unsettled me. As I recited them to the panel of casting directors, the room seemed to shift imperceptibly. The light dimmed just enough to notice, and the walls seemed closer, as though the room were leaning in to listen. The directors exchanged glances. Their faces were unreadable, yet I felt their approval like a whisper on the back of my neck. They offered me the part on the spot, bypassing the usual delays and callbacks. I should have felt elated, but as I left, a tight knot of unease coiled in my stomach. Rehearsals began in the same theater where I had found the script. The crew claimed it had been renovated just for this production, though the stale air and creaking floorboards suggested otherwise. The other actors were welcoming, their smiles warm but distant, as if some part of them were held back, tethered to something unseen. From the first read-through, strange things began to happen. Lines that I had never read aloud before felt as familiar as childhood rhymes. I would speak, and the words would pour out, in a voice that barely felt like my own. Around me, the cast seemed to sink into their roles too deeply, their expressions shifting unnaturally, as if they were not acting but channeling. The stage itself seemed alive. During one rehearsal, as I stepped into my character's first pivotal scene, the air grew colder, and a low hum vibrated through the floor. "Did you feel that?" I asked, but my co-star, Lily, just stared at me blankly before delivering her next line. By the third day, I was no longer sure where the script ended, and I began. The character I played, a struggling actor consumed by an increasingly malevolent role, was bleeding into my reality. I caught myself thinking his thoughts, completing his sentences in my mind even when I wasn't rehearsing. The directors seemed pleased with our progress, but their eyes lingered too long, their smiles stretched too wide. They clapped at moments that felt wrong. One day, as I exited the stage after a particularly grueling scene, one of them whispered, "You're becoming him." I didn't ask what they meant. I didn't want to know. By the end of the week, the line between rehearsal and reality had blurred completely. I no longer knew if I was acting or living a story that wasn't my own. And the script, the one I had taken home, now bore new lines each night. Lines that I hadn't written, but which fit perfectly into the scenes we performed. I knew I should have walked away, but I couldn't. Someone had sunk its claws into me. By the time dress rehearsals began, the theater felt less like a space for creation and more like a trap. The building seemed to exhale cold air, its ancient walls shuddering faintly as though responding to our presence. The cast moved through their roles with mechanical precision, but there was a strange vacancy in their eyes, a hollow detachment that unsettled me. I felt it creeping into my own mind too, as if my thoughts were no longer solely my own. It wasn't just the atmosphere that was changing. The shadows had begun to shift, moving in ways they shouldn't. On the stage, the spotlights left long, distorted forms on the floor, stretching and twisting even when no one stood in their path. I told myself it was a trick of the lighting, an aging rig casting warped beams. But deep down, I knew better. One night, during a scene where my character reflects alone under a single spotlight, the air around me thickened. The words came easily, as always, spilling out as if they belonged more to the space than to me. But as I reached the final line, the temperature dropped sharply. The light above me flickered once, twice, then steadied. But the shadow cast on the floor wasn't mine. It was taller, thinner, and bent at an unnatural angle, as though whatever cast it didn't quite understand the human form. My heart raced as I stood frozen, unsure whether to step forward or flee. The shadow didn't move, but its presence was palpable, an oppressive weight pressing against my chest. I heard faint whispers, too soft to discern, but layered, like a distant crowd murmuring in unison. "Take 5, called one of the directors, breaking the spell. The shadow vanished as the stage lights dimmed, leaving me gasping for air. I glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed, but the cast was already dispersing, their faces blank and their movements stiff. I considered quitting. The thought haunted me as I left the theater that night, but the script, now a permanent fixture in my bag, seemed to hum faintly, its pull unyielding. I couldn't leave, or maybe I didn't want to. The next day, I caught glimpses of something in the corners of the stage. It was never clear, just flickers of motion, like the rustle of fabric or a dark shape retreating into the wings. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. But my unease grew, gnawing at my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. The cast was affected too. Lily, my co-star, stopped meeting my eyes entirely. During a break, I asked her if she had noticed anything strange. She hesitated, her fingers worrying the hem of her sleeve. "The shadows," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're alive." That night, as I lay in bed, the script on my nightstand glowed faintly in the dark, its title shimmering as if catching an invisible light. I turned it over, but the glow seeped through the cover. Sleep eluded me as whispers from the theater echoed in my mind, growing louder until they felt like they were in the room with me. Opening night arrived with an unsettling sense of finality. The theater bustled with activity, the crew darting about in a frenzy as the audience began to filter in. Yet despite the chaos, the air was heavy with an ominous stillness, as though the theater itself was bracing for what was to come. I stood in the wings, clutching the script. I had memorized every line, but the words had taken on a life of their own, morphing in my mind until I could no longer distinguish them from my thoughts. When the lights dimmed and the opening music swelled, my heart pounded, each beat reverberating through my body like an echo in a cavern. The first scenes unfolded smoothly. The audience responded with quiet fascination, their faces dimly lit by the warm glow of the stage. But as the second act began, the atmosphere shifted. The lights flickered faintly, and the temperature in the theater dropped. A thin mist began to creep along the floor, curling around the actors' feet like living tendrils. My pivotal monologue arrived, and as I stepped into the spotlight, a wave of nausea rolled over me. The words tumbled from my mouth effortlessly, yet they felt foreign, as though someone else were speaking through me. The mist thickened, swirling into strange, almost humanoid shapes at the edges of the stage. The audience remained silent, but their expressions had changed. They weren't captivated, they were entranced. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, their faces eerily blank. A faint hum filled the air, growing louder as my monologue reached its climax. When I spoke the final line, the spotlight dimmed, and the mist surged forward, enveloping the stage. I stumbled back, but the ground beneath me felt different, softer, less stable. The stage was gone, replaced by a void of endless black. The only source of light was the faint glow of the script, now clutched tightly in my hand. Around me, the mist coalesced into forms, vague, shifting figures that radiated an oppressive energy. They surrounded me, their faceless heads tilted as though studying me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to move. The whispers began again, louder this time, a cacophony of voices that filled the void. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, yet their meaning pressed into my mind like the weight of 1,000 hands. The words echoed the theme of the play, but twisted, corrupted, as if revealing some deeper truth I wasn't meant to know. "You are the role," a single voice boomed, rising above the chaos. It was neither male nor female, but resonated with a power that made my bones ache. "The stage is eternal. The play is life." As the mist closed in, I realized with chilling clarity that the theater wasn't simply a venue. It was a gateway. And I was no longer performing. I was part of something much larger, something that had been waiting for me since the moment I picked up that script. The mist pressed closer, its chill seeping through my skin, filling me with a strange hollowness. My breath came in shallow gasps, each exhale vanishing into the thick, swirling fog. The figures around me, shifting, formless silhouettes, watched in silence. Their presence wasn't malicious, but it was overwhelming, an ancient weight that pressed down on me, bending me towards something I couldn't yet see. The script in my hand grew warm, the faint glow of its title growing stronger, casting pale light onto the shifting void. As I looked down, the text on its pages began to shift and flow like ink spilled on water. The lines I had memorized dissolved, replaced by new ones. My name appeared again, this time etched larger, intertwined with phrases that seemed to address me directly. "You are chosen. Speak the final truth." The voices rose in unison, a dissonant choir that thrummed through my skull. My legs trembled as the ground, or what I thought was ground, seemed to tilt beneath me. I flipped the page, and the text settled into a single line, bold and unyielding. Speak the roll, or remain the silence. I didn't understand. My voice faltered as I tried to read aloud, but the words stuck in my throat, heavy and sharp. The figures leaned closer, their presence pulling at my mind, and I realized they weren't entirely solid. Their forms flickered like projections on warped glass, their outlines too perfect one moment and dissolving the next. They weren't alive, not in the way I understood life. They were fragments, shadows of something left behind. The spotlight above me flickered to life, its beam piercing the mist and illuminating the stage once more. The audience was back, though now their faces had changed. Their expressions were slack, their skin gray, their eyes empty pits that seemed to devour the light. They sat motionless, staring straight ahead, as if waiting for me to finish what I'd begun. And I understood. They were trapped, actors in the play, drawn into a story that would never end. The role had been theirs once, just as it was now mine. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I won't." The figures around me recoiled, their forms rippling in agitation. The spotlight above flickered, the mist churned, and the stage groaned beneath my feet. The script in my hand burned brighter, its warmth now almost unbearable, as if demanding I comply. But I couldn't. If I spoke, if I gave myself fully to the role, I knew I'd become part of this place, another shadow among the endless figures waiting in the wings. The whispers turned to a roar, the sound vibrating through every part of me. The text on the page writhed violently, the letters splitting apart and reforming until they became a question, stark and undeniable. Who are you without the role? I froze. I didn't have an answer. The role had consumed me, entwined itself with my thoughts and actions until I could no longer separate where it ended and I began. My hesitation only seemed to feed the void, the mist pressing closer as if to swallow me whole. But then I remembered. It was faint, a memory buried beneath layers of rehearsed lines and borrowed identities, but it was mine. The laughter of friends, the warmth of sunlight on my skin, the feeling of being Thomas. An actor, yes, but also a person, someone who existed beyond the confines of a stage. "I'm not the role," I said, my voice steadier now. "I'm me." The script flared brightly, and for a moment, I thought it would consume me entirely. But instead, it dissolved into a fine, shimmering dust that scattered into the mist. The figures around me froze, their outlines flickering before fading into the fog. The spotlight dimmed, and the roaring voices fell silent. Then, I was back. The stage beneath my feet was solid once more, the theater silent, except for the faint hum of the lights overhead. The audience was gone, the seats empty and dust-covered. Around me, the cast and crew lay slumped in their chairs or leaning against the walls, their faces pale but peaceful, as if waking from a long dream. The script was nowhere to be seen. I stumbled out into the night, the cool air biting at my skin, and turned back to look at the theater one last time. Its marquee was blank, the lights extinguished, and for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it all. But in the faint moonlight, I caught a glimpse of something on the door, a single line scrawled in silver ink. "The play is eternal. The role is always waiting." As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the theater was watching me, its darkened windows like eyes following my every step. Though I had escaped, the weight of its presence lingered, a quiet reminder that the stage was never truly empty.